So now we're gonna check out just how much pressure we're building. Welcome to a Sunday afternoon here at the shop. It's just myself and I'm trying to get some things done before an upcoming track day. We will be using the 996 turbo turned kind of GT2 replica with the removal of the front drive shaft and the differential in there, so it's rear wheel drive and LSD, bigger turbos, kind of the works in terms of power. And the car is fast, it is loud, it is properly set up, you know, all the suspension joints, GT3 sway bars and all of that. So it's all kind of been done there. And now I've got a few things that I want to do before this track day. So just like with all cars, we want to make sure that the brakes are up to snuff. So these are the OEM calipers, so 4 pistons front, 4 pistons back, but I am running 350 millimeters rotors, which is from the 997 version of the car, and I've done that by spacing out the calipers. Now with bigger rotors, it's just not enough, so now I've got a set of PFC pads up in here, and what you see beside here are the 997 GT2 RS intercoolers. So these are an OEM intercooler, but they're significantly thicker than the ones that are in the car right now. So these are the must-dos, plus a wheel balance on the front of this car, and because it goes through tires just like crazy, it's only rear drive, so I'm getting like 2,000 miles from these A052s. You can see that they are turning into slicks already, but I'll probably need to get a new rear set for the track day. Regardless, I'm gonna try and cover this as best as possible and hopefully make some content for you guys. We've been working with a lot of Porsches. There's another cool one out here that you may have seen. This is all air-cooled 1970s stuff, but this is water-cooled. This is much more modern, and without too much further ado, I gotta get to work, and I'll try to highlight some of the areas of interest of this upgrade. And thankfully, on this car, it's really easy to swap brakes. You just have to pull out this pin and then this spring clip that holds them in place. These are some shims that were on there. But basically, this is how the caliper looks like. They just slide right in once you compress the 2 pistons on each side, and then we're gonna slide the pin back in, and of course the clip that holds them in there. And of course, after that, we're going to be bleeding the system with some RBF 600 fluid to just make sure that that's fresh in there. To the back of the car, the system is very, very similar. The pads also slide right out, so you don't have to remove the caliper. So when I'm running these larger 350 millimeter rotors, there's 2 things. So first of all, we're not quite using 100% of the rotor surface, which is not bad because the thermal capacity is much higher. But we use these spacers, which are kind of like little heat sinks. So the caliper stays a little bit cooler, and they also space out the caliper the correct amount so that we can run the 350 millimeters rotors instead of the 330 that come with the car. And another small caveat of running this kind of setup is that you get a tiny little lip. You can see that just on the edge of your pad. Not a big deal. If you put the same pad in the car, it'll be perfectly fine, but that's just a little caveat of running the larger rotors on the car. So now that I kind of showed you how it all looks, I'm going to just keep on trucking here and just get these pads swapped out and the fluid bled. So far, I've got the left side intercooler done. And I wanted to get that done because there's a bunch of trimming and cutting and modifying that needs to happen to get these 997 GT2 intercoolers in. And I wanted to get one side done, then I'll videotape some of the challenges of getting the second side done. But before taking it apart, I've got that fully in the car. So here, if you come closer, you can see some of the differences. So first of all, 996 intercooler is a little bit thinner. Of course, the ducting and all that has to work through the fender. This is all OEM here. You can see the fin density up in here is a little bit less, and it all fits beautifully. Now keep an eye on how this all fits in here, because we're just gonna walk on over. This is the final kind of modification that was needed. This is a thicker intercooler, but it does still clear everything, as you can see. The fin density is higher, and that's one of the main reasons why it cools better. It is a little bit shorter, so if you come in here, and you can kind of see that the ends are a little bit shorter, and there had to be some trimming. And the trickiest part of this job is trimming and resealing. So there's a lot of seals that I've redone to make sure that it seals to the intake side, and it even seals on the outlet of the intercooler. This side sealing, or this half sealing, is a little bit less important than the top one. It's a little bit of a pain to get it all together. These are a bit of a pain to get back in, so give yourself some time if you're doing this project on your own, but I can definitely confirm that it all bolts up. The hoses come in nicely. It's just a matter of trimming it carefully, and that's why I'm going to show a little bit more detail once we go over and we take that other side off. Okay, so in this process of upgrading your intercoolers, one of the things that you find that's interesting is that this intercooler on the left side of the car had a lot more oil in it than the other side. So I took the intake off in here to see, how things looked on the intake, and sure enough, inside the intake tube, there was a whole bunch of oil. And the distinction here is that this intake tube has the PCV, so the positive crankcase ventilation vent, which pulls extra crankcase gases, and along with those some oil vapor on this tube. And if you go on the other side, in front of the other turbo, so that PCV tube, it doesn't have it on both sides, and therefore this turbocharger here and this intake side is going to be a lot more dry when it comes to oil. So if you make that observation, that's why, because the PCV system of the car, positive crankcase ventilation, vents just on one side, on that side of the turbo. And we know that these engines do consume some oil by design, so it's nothing to be super concerned about, but you're gonna notice it and be like, hey, why is that? Why is there more oil in that intercooler? There you go. That's why there's more oil in that particular intercooler. So now I'm gonna put this back on. I've also checked these billet turbos that we have on the car. So these are Garrett turbos, upgraded turbochargers. They feel really good. There's no excessive shaft play. They spin nicely. I don't have them water cooled, so these are only oil cooled, like the original turbos on this car. And I've talked to a turbocharger engineer about this, and he said that for these turbos it's fine. Just don't go crazy on it without letting it cool off a little bit, so that the oil does the job of cooling the turbochargers after a hard drive, and then you don't have to add the additional water lines. You can, of course, but you don't need to. Once I remove the frame, it'll be a little bit easier. When you mark it, you mark, let's say, this side of 1, and you can mark this side in a subtle way with 1, and then this is towards the front of the car, this is towards the rear of the car. And you can mark this one with 2, and then you can mark it on here with 2. So these, we'll clean them up before installing them again. I imagine it can be worse on some cars, but on this car there's just some surface rust. And here is where you can separate the frame that holds the intercooler in place. Now you're left with these two halves, and then you've got these clips. They come off pretty easily. I use zap straps instead of these. You got your two halves. Here is the new intercooler and your old intercooler sitting here. And you can see that this side is pointing down, just like this. And then you can see that this side is pointing in. You will notice that, look at the location of these tabs here. They're offset from each other. So the bracket on the 997 is not quite the same. You only end up using one of them on this side, and you do end up using both at the bottom. It is very secure, so you don't have to really worry about is it gonna come loose. I mean, that thing is definitely not going anywhere, and you'll see how it all comes together. So you can see that there is a little bit of a seal, and here we're going to be replacing all this with new weather stripping, so it's not something to worry about too much. And what you'll notice is that if you just try to mate this as is, well, it doesn't entirely fit. So it does go over the edge here somewhat, but it needs some persuasion. So what we need to do is we need to trim this area here so that the intercooler sits much lower down. We will need to trim some of these corners because we want it to not squish out the sides. And then we're going to center it right above the middle, right like this, and use new weather stripping all around in here to make sure we get a good seal with the new intercooler. What you want to do is you want to line this piece up with the edge of the new intercooler, and you kind of see it kind of fits nicely together. And then you're going to need to trim this on the outside, right there, and here. So I'm going to be trimming those edges, and going to be trimming this as well, all along there. Going to be trimming what I marked up in here, and here, and in here, and going to be applying weather stripping on the intercooler itself and on these edges here. Will sit nicely flush like this. Okay, that's looking good. Next step you want to take is you want to make sure that you clean all the surface area, and I'm going to put weather stripping down, a certain weather stripping down in the sides here, and I'm going to weather strip here as well as here and just compress everything together to make it seal. Weather stripping that is collapsible is that, for example, this one will get squished a lot by the intercooler shroud when we put it on top, and that's what you want. You don't want something that's super thick so that it interferes with the installation. Of course, another key here is to make sure that all of the weather stripping is a little bit longer than it has to be, because that way it actually ends up being captured between the shroud and the intercooler, and the glue on the weather stripping is bound to fail. So this way you have it all compacted in there. And as a final check of your success, if you've done this correctly, you can pop out this side cover in here and just kind of look through any areas that are showing any light. There's very, very few areas that are showing any light at all, which means that this intercooler installation will be efficient, and that's again exactly what you want. There needs some trimming. And you know it needs to come off. So this part here and this part here up to about. On top of this, what I found is that this entire lip, so all the way to the end, should be trimmed. Okay, so now next step is, like I mentioned, the weather stripping treatment. After you've made all of these modifications, it's time to put it together. You can see that with some pressure, it will cinch down and seal up. And I'm gonna do the final zap straps up in a little bit here and trim, but before that is done, then I want to put it into the frame. So now this is what I did last time, and this is where I would need a potential second hand. Perfect. Okay, so now I'm going to try and get a thin washer. That's why I sharpened these, so that I can just slide them on with a little bit less struggle. That's perfect there. Hold it, hold it, hold it, hold it. Beauty. That's one. Yep. Okay, sweet. Now the next struggle. Yes, there is a next struggle.
Fitting it in?
Yep. Kinda, sorta. This one has to go like this. Yeah. Yes. There we go. Now we need bolts. Okay, that's in. So after you've done all this, everything's in, both the left and the right side beautifully in, clamps are in, everything's happy. What we're gonna do here is we're gonna pull out the intake, and we're going to do a smoke test of the car to make sure that we've got no boost leaks. And then we're gonna put her on the dyno. So to the smoke test, we'll show you guys. So first, we're gonna remove this this stock intake here. You loosen up. You just have to twist a little bit. Boom. This is a smoke machine here. Basically, you need a battery connection. We got a bladder in here that we've inflated, and this machine will generate some smoke. It's already doing it. That's a good indication the whole intake track is filling up with smoke. And now, check all the connections. It's good. We're completely smoke-free. All right, so after a bunch of work on getting those intercoolers in, we've got the car on the dyno. Now, the intercoolers fit beautifully in here, and we left the bumper off and the rear lights off simply because we want to see if any sort of hoses pop off, if there's any sort of issues while we dyno tune. So now we're going to be able to, we've had this car on the dyno before, now we're going to be able to see, can we get more power from the addition of these intercoolers? How much more power? How is the cooling and so on? It's really nice to have this dyno controlled environment. So our specialty has always been tuning. We've been tuning these cars for a while. This is our development car, and now that the intercooling is up to snuff, this car also has the upgraded turbochargers. I'm very excited to get behind the keys on this and really dial it in for these new parts. It's always very important to dial your car in for any sort of new parts that you add on. So it's looking good, it's looking mean. I'm gonna jump in there and do some pulls and dial it in. So welcome to the inside of the 996. Now we're gonna talk about the results of the intercooler upgrade. So we have this car on our dyno and we tuned it on on pump gas, the top level pump gas that we had here before the intercoolers, and this was last year. And now we put on the GT2 intercoolers and we redialed in the car. So there's a few components to maximizing the performance of an upgrade. One of the components is, of course, installing the upgrade, which we've done. The second component is taking the tune, the calibration of the car, and optimizing it for that upgrade. Without the optimization process, you are not going to reap all the benefits of the hard work of putting in the upgrade, or really the value of the parts installed. So because the charge air was cooler, I was able to add boost and add some timing. So just having charge air cooler is great, and that's what the hard part does. But without adding the boost, without redialing in the boost curve, and without adding the additional timing that's now allowed by the cooler air charge, really you're not going to see much in terms of the performance. So we use the callback support we always have for this car to dial in. It flashes the OEM ECU. It's a very simple process, and we actually tune these cars locally. We tune them on our dyno and we tune them remotely as well. So if you guys are looking for a tune, we'll be more than happy to set this up for you. Now, this is a Mustang dyno, and the dyno reads a little bit low, but what we're looking for here is actually the delta, so the difference in power curves. And you can see here this darker, the red is the power curve, and the darker curves are the most recent ones, and then the torque is the blue curve. So there is a gap throughout the entire power band between the previous tune using the stock intercoolers and the new tune using the upgraded intercoolers. It is worth about 25 to 30 horsepower across the entire power band. And one of the things that I really like to show that really highlights what this gap does in terms of performance is acceleration. So if we put these graphs in terms of time, all of a sudden you see that the more powerful curve, where it made more power, is taking about 11 seconds to pull through a fourth gear pull, a full sweep, starting and ending at the same RPM, and the lower power curve is taking about over 12.5 seconds. So in a fourth gear pull from 2200 RPM to 6500 RPM in this car, you are accelerating through that 1.5 to 1.8 seconds faster as a result of the power gains. And in terms of absolute numbers, so we are sitting at 467 wheel horsepower with the upgrade and with the additional tuning, and this is on GT28 turbos. It's got a catalyzed upgraded exhaust, and now it's got the upgraded intercoolers. The airbox remains stock, and of course all of our tuning is done here in house. You can see that peak power is achieved right at redline, which I really like to see. I like to dial in cars like this and make them feel and perform really well. The linearity in this power delivery really pays dividends, whether you're on track, whether you're on the road. And 467 on our dyno, we read about 14% below what a dyno jet reads. Most people will show you dyno jet numbers. So this car would be on pump gas between 530 and 540 horsepower to the wheels on an equivalent dyno jet. So very happy with this upgrade. Very happy to dial this in and extract the performance gains here. So another 0.1 bar, an additional timing as a result of being able to push for that with the upgraded intercoolers. And here we are, we have a faster 996 turbo. So hopefully this was informative for you guys. Hopefully you enjoy. Do subscribe for more content. We have more Porsche content as well as other content, but we do have more Porsche content planned for this generation cars, the newer cars, as well as a lot of the older or air-cooled. So subscribe. If you got any questions, get in touch with us. We have our website. We have a phone. We're present in a lot of media and mediums. We'd love to help you out. Set up your car, get the most from it, tune your car, and if needed, we can get you parts as well. So cheers, and I'll talk to you guys later.